Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm painting an Imperial Dwarf, a classic model from the early days of Warhammer Fantasy Battle, ready for your games of Warhammer The Old World. So the first thing I've done is I've primed this model black, as this will give us a nice smooth, even base coat for the rest of our colours. And first of all, I'm going to paint the wood on his spear. So I'm coming in with dryad bark first, and I'm going to paint this all over the wooden part to the spear. So the reason I'm completely painting the spear first is because there can be some dry brushing stages, which could be messy over other parts of the model. So it's a lot easier just to paint the whole of the wooden areas first, and then we can focus on the rest of the model. So I'm just applying a couple of layers of dryad bark to the wood of the spear to get a nice smooth even base coat. And after a couple of layers, I've got a nice solid coat of dryad bark all over the wood. Now I'm coming in with some Gorthor brown. And I'm going to dry brush this all over that dryad bark. So I'm going to be quite heavy here, just leaving that dryad bark showing in all of the deepest recesses to the wood grain. By dry brushing this, we're going to get the most out of the little bit of wood grain that there is on this spear. So we slowly come with brighter colours to get a really great looking wood effect on the spear. And after that Gorthor brown, you can see how it's lightened up a lot of the spear, but we've still got those dark parts in the deepest recesses. So now I'm coming with some Baylor brown. I'm doing a slightly lighter dry brush on top of that Gorthor brown. This is really going to pick out a lot of the detail on this spear, giving us a nice wood grain effect. And after just one more dry brush, we'll get that classic 1980s light wood effect. So with that Baylor brown applied, you can see how it's really brought out that grain. Now there's just one final dry brush left to apply to the wood, and that's with some flayed one flesh. Just going to very gently dry brush this so it catches only the most raised details. I'm being really gentle with this dry brush, and then this will give us that really great classic bright wood effect on the spear. And with the spear painted, we're now free to carry on and paint the rest of the dwarf in a classic Warhammer style. So I'm coming in with some Thunderhawk blue first, and I'm going to paint this all over the fabric on this dwarf. I'm just picking out all of the parts to the uniform with some Thunderhawk blue. This is a very light paint, so it might take a couple of layers to build up to a solid coat. But this is going to give us a really nice bright blue uniform on our dwarf. So these dwarves are a bit different than the mountain dwarves. They live in imperial cities, so they have brighter clothing and a more fancy empire style of attire. So after a couple of layers of Thunderhawk blue, I've got a nice solid coat all over the dwarf. So the next thing I'm going to paint is his jacket. For this, I'm coming in with some corn red. This is going to be a really deep dark red colour and give a really nice contrast between the brighter sort of uniform and then this much darker jacket. I'm being careful around the Thunderhawk blue to make sure I don't accidentally paint over any of it, but I want to make sure I catch all of that jacket with a couple of layers of corn red. Obviously, because this is quite a small model, dealing with some small details, so I'm just being really careful as I apply a couple of layers of corn red all over that jacket. I'm also making sure I catch all of the back of the jacket and the sort of ruffles he's got around the sleeves as well, just catching all of these areas with some corn red. And after a couple of layers of corn red, you can see we've got a really nice dark jacket. It's really giving it some contrast between that and the lighter uniform. So now it's time to paint the skin. For this, I'm coming in with Bugman's Glow. Just going to carefully apply this all over the skin to this Imperial Dwarf. Just probably going to take a couple of layers of Bugman's Glow to build up to a nice solid cover. Just make sure I catch all of the face with some Bugman's Glow. I'm not worried if I accidentally paint any of the beard. We've been coming back over and painting this with another colour in a later step. But I do want to make sure I catch all of the skin with a couple of layers of Bugman's Glow. I'm also making sure I catch the hands as well. Once again, being careful around the areas already painted blue. And I also want to make sure I catch the tops of his feet here. You could paint these as some form of sock, but I find that painting them with a bit of skin just makes it look like he's wearing some slippers. And with all the skin picked out, the dwarf's really coming together now. So just a few more details left to base coat on this model. So now with some Corvus Black, I'm going to pick out his sort of slipper shoe things. So I'm just carefully applying a layer of Corvus Black all over his slippers. So be careful around the skin, but just catching his shoes with a couple of layers of Corvus Black. And after we picked out his shoes, the next thing I'm going to paint on the model is his beard and his hair. For this, I'm coming in with Wild Rider Red. Going to give this dwarf a sort of orangey ginger beard. So I find starting out with Wild Rider Red's a really good base coat for this. I'm just making sure I pick out his beard. Once again, as this is an Imperial Dwarf, he's been living in the Empire rather than just a big bushy beard. He's got this slightly more stylised beard and moustache combo, which makes these Imperial Dwarfs a little bit more interesting to paint. So I'm just making sure I pick out all of his facial hair with a couple of layers of Wild Rider Red. And I'm also picking out the hair on the top of his head as well, showing out from around his bandana. Just make sure I catch this with a couple of layers of Wild Rider Red. And with the beard and hair picked out, the next thing I'm going to paint is his bandana. And for this, I'm using Avalan Sunset, just to give us a nice bright pop of yellow on the model. I'm just carefully applying this all over the areas of the bandana, making sure I don't accidentally catch any of the other parts of the model we've already painted. Just make sure I catch that bandana with a couple of layers of Avalan Sunset. By using a few layers, I'll get a nice solid coat of Avalan Sunset. This really nice bright band sticking out around his head. You can see I'm keeping that sort of old school classic style of bright colours and high contrast. I find it works really well for these models. And with the bandana picked out, it's just one final base coat left to apply to this dwarf, and that's going to be to pick out the tip of his spear. For this, I'm just using some lead belcher. I'm just going to carefully apply this all over the tip of his spear. Obviously, being careful around the wood, we've already painted and highlighted and got that great texture on. And just make sure I pick out all of the spear with a couple of layers of lead belcher. And after the tip of the spear has been picked out, that is all of the base coats applied to this Imperial Dwarf. So the next step is to shade the miniature. The first shade I'm coming in with is some Reichland Flesh Shade. And I'm going to apply this all over the skin and the hair to the model. Reichland Flesh Shade works really well with the Wild Rider Red to give a nice ginger appearance to the hair. So I'm just making sure I shade all of the skin and the hair with some Reichland Flesh Shade. And finally, with some Nuln Oil, I'm going to shade everything else. So I'm going to shade the metallics at the tip of the spear. Don't need to worry about shading the wood, obviously. I'm also going to shade the bandana, the jacket, the uniform, and his shoes. So we're going to catch all of these with a shade of Nuln Oil. You want to make sure this sinks into all of the recesses, but doesn't pull too heavily. So just keep an eye on it while it dries. And if you do notice it pooling, just wick some away with a dry brush. You get a nice effect once the shade has dried. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. And if you'd like to support the channel, please become a member by pressing the join button down below or joining me over on Patreon. And after the shades have dried, you can see they've added definition all over the miniature. So now it's time to start highlighting. The first thing we're going to highlight is the skin. So I'm coming in with Bugman's Glow again first. I'm going to apply this to all of the areas of the skin that the shade didn't settle. So wherever the Bugman's Glow settled in a recess, I'm leaving that, coming in on either side and brightening the rest of the skin back up to its brighter colour. You can see on the face how that shade settled into the recesses. I'm coming in on either side and brightening the rest of the skin. Doing the same on the hands here, where it's settled in between the fingers. I'm leaving that and brightening the rest of the hand back up to its brighter Bugman's Glow colour. And on the feet, where the shade sort of formed a pattern and created the texture, I'm leaving the shade in those recesses and brightening the flatter parts back up. After that Bugman's Glow's been applied, you can see how it's brightened up that skin a little bit, but we've still got all the definition from the shade. So now, with a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone, I'm applying this in the middle of all the areas that I just applied the pure Bugman's Glow. So I want to focus this towards upwards facing surfaces and larger areas, parts that would catch the light, making sure I leave a bit of the pure Bugman's Glow showing through, but also catching all of those raised surfaces with a bit of this mix. On the fingers here, I want to focus this towards areas like the knuckles, leaving a bit of Bugman's Glow showing through, towards that sharper knuckle, putting a little bit of this mix. And doing the same on the feet as well, leaving a bit of Bugman's Glow showing around the edges, but applying some of this mix in the middle of all of those areas. With that mix applied, you can see how we're really starting to brighten up the skin, focus in those highlights. So now I'm coming in with some pure Cadian Flesh Tone, and I'm going to focus this again in the middle of all the areas that I just applied the previous mix. So I want to make sure a little bit of that mix is still showing through around the edges and really focus this towards those raised areas, sharpest points, things like that. Just applying a little bit of pure Cadian Flesh Tone in the middle of all the areas we just applied the previous step. This works really well with those previous layers to give us a nice transition up from the darkest colours to the brightest highlights. By focusing this onto the sharper points, like the knuckles there on the hand, it really creates some interest, shows all the details to the model. And on the feet, I'm just applying this in the middle of the areas that I applied the previous layer. There's just one final layer left to apply after this to get our brightest highlights. With the Cadian Flesh Tone applied, you can see how it's really brightened up those areas of the skin. So now with some Kislev Flesh, just going to apply some final highlights onto the sharpest areas. So it's things here like the tip of his nose, the lower lip, sort of the points of his cheeks, and these sharp areas like that. I'm just applying a small spot of Kislev Flesh. And on the hands, I really want to just focus this to the very tips of the knuckles and all those sharpest points. So we should have a nice smooth transition through all of our shades and our highlights to get to this brightest colour. Just make sure I pick out a few spots on the skin with a small spot of Kislev Flesh. And after the skin has been painted, you can see it's really brought out the features to this dwarf. So the next thing I'm going to highlight is his beard and hair. And for this, I'm coming in with Wild Rider Red again first. And what I'm doing now is I'm just carefully picking out all of the raised strands to the beard with a little bit of Wild Rider red. So making sure that that shade is settled in all of those recesses, just catching the raised details of the sculpted on hair with a little bit of Wild Rider red. So this will brighten up that hair a bit, work with the shade, really give us a nice sort of bright orange ginger hair colour on this dwarf. That Wild Rider red applied, you can see how it's brightened up the hair a little bit. So that's just one final highlight left to apply to the hair. And that's with some Troll Slayer orange. Just going to carefully pick out a few spots of the hair to catch with a bit of Troll Slayer orange. So I want to focus this towards sort of the ends of the hairs. So it looks like they're getting brighter as they get longer. Just carefully picking out a few spots with a little bit of Troll Slayer orange. Doing the same with the hair on the head as well, focusing it towards sort of tips of the hair. And just applying small lines of Troll Slayer orange. And with that Troll Slayer orange applied, that is the hair highlighted on this Imperial Dwarf. So now the next step is I'm going to paint the eyes. For this I'm coming in with Abaddon Black first. I'm going to carefully sink this into the recesses of the eye sockets. Also being careful not to accidentally get this over the skin I've already painted and highlighted. Just sinking a little bit of Abaddon Black into the recesses of the eyes. Now I'm coming in with a little bit of white scar. I'm just going to apply a small line of white in that black we just painted. Keeping this nice and small. Just applying a small line of white scar in the middle of the black. Finally, with some Abaddon Black again, just going to paint a small spot in the middle of the white. And this will give the impression of a pupil. Carefully apply a small spot of black in the middle of the white. And with all of the face details painted, see it's really added some interest to this dwarf, made him come to life. It's now time to start highlighting the clothing. First of all, I'm coming in with some Mephiston red. I'm going to start highlighting that jacket. For this one here, you can see that as he's sculpted on sort of ridges. So these are what I want to catch with the Mephiston red. Leaving that corn red in the flatter panels. This will really up the contrast. So I'm just catching all of these raised details and any other edges with sort of a chunky edge highlight of Mephiston red. I'm also going to pick out the edges of the ruffles, all of these sort of details I want to catch with the Mephiston red, but making sure I leave most of the jacket. With those details picked out, he's added a bit of interest to that jacket. So now, with some Evil Sun Scarlet, I'm just going to apply a really small, careful edge highlight in all the areas I picked out with the Mephiston red. So I want to make sure there's still bits of Mephiston red showing. You just capture the most raised details, sharpest points. All of those kind of areas with a small thin edge highlight of Evil Sun Scarlet. And for the ruffles, once again I'm just applying this at the very top of those spots. Just give the impression of light catching. And with the Evil Sun Scarlet applied, that is the jacket highlighted. So next thing to highlight is his uniform. For this I'm coming in with Thunderhawk blue again first. And much like with the skin, I'm applying this to all of the areas that the shade didn't settle. So wherever the shade's in a recess, I'm leaving that darkened down blue, but I'm brightening the rest of the uniform back up to its brighter blue with some Thunderhawk blue. But doing this will really up that contrast, brighten the uniform back up, and give us a nice bright Imperial Dwarf at the end. So once again, just making sure I leave all of the shade in the recess and brightening up all of the smoother, flatter and raised areas back to their original colour with some Thunderhawk blue. With that Thunderhawk blue applied, you can see how it has brightened up those areas. So now, with a 50-50 mix of Thunderhawk blue and rust grey, I'm going to apply this in the middle of the areas we just applied the pure Thunderhawk blue. So I'm making sure I leave some of the Thunderhawk blue showing and focusing this towards upwards and raised areas, things that the light would catch the most. Just applying a small highlight of this mix to all those raised areas on the uniform. Let's work my way back around the model, and wherever I applied the previous step, just make sure I apply a little bit of this mix in the middle of all of those areas, and we come through with our final highlight in the next step to really give a nice effect to this uniform and give nice transitions from the darkest parts up to the lightest parts. With that mix applied, you can see how it's brightened up some of those areas. We're getting a nice transition through our colours. Finally, with some rust grey, I'm just going to apply an edge highlight to all the sharpest points and most raised details on the uniform. So wherever there's a sharp edge or raised detail, I'm just applying a thin line of rust grey to all of these areas. Just give the impression of light catching off the very edges, as well as brightening up these areas and adding interest to the model. You can see how with that darker jacket and this brighter uniform, it's really giving it that sort of old school classic look. That contrast between light and dark really was a key element to painting in the original Warhammer Fantasy Battle. And with that edge highlight applied, that's the uniform painted, and this dwarf's really coming together now. So the next step is I'm going to highlight the bandana with some Avalanche Sunset first. Just going to carefully apply this to all the raised parts that shade didn't settle. So there's quite a lot of texture to this bandana. So I'm just focusing it onto the areas that I can catch nice and easily with my brush. Make sure I brighten up those larger raised areas, but leaving that shade in all the recesses. So this bandana is really going to give that pop of colour to the model, make him look fantastic. And with the Avalanche Sunset applied, you can see how it's brightened up that bandana. With one final highlight will really make it pop. So with some Flashgitz yellow, just going to carefully apply small edge highlight, Flashgitz yellow to any of the sharpest and most raised parts of the bandana. This is a really bright yellow colour, so use it sparingly, but pick out some of the sharpest points, most raised details. Just apply a thin edge highlight, a Flashgitz yellow on that bandana. And with that Flashgitz yellow applied, you can see it's really added that pop of brightness to that bandana. So there's only a couple of details left to highlight, and the next of those will be the shoes. For this I'm using Mechanica Standard Grey. I'm just going to carefully apply an edge highlight to the sharp points at the end of the shoes, catching the very tips and the edges by the feet, just applying a thin edge highlight from Mechanica Standard Grey. And with the shoes highlighted, only thing left to highlight now is the metallics at the top of the spear. So for this, I'm using Stormhost Silver. I'm just going to carefully pick out all the sharp points to the spear, so the edges and the details coming down the middle. Just catching these with a thin edge highlight, a Stormhost Silver, and not forgetting the bolts as well. I'm just going to catch these with a highlight as well. And with the metallic details highlighted, that is how to paint a great looking Imperial Dwarf in a classic style for your games of Warhammer The Old World. So please let me know in the comments down below, do you like these Imperial Dwarf models, or do you prefer the more classic, big bushy beard, mountain dwarf look?
A great big bushy beard.
Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you would like, you can join me over on my Patreon, where I have a free tier as I'm trying to build up a great little painting community. over there. So thank you very much for watching, and happy painting!